Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and today we're going to be talking about the 3 generations of wotv characters, where we are now, and how you should think about spending your UR scrolls. But first, there's a ticket that I want to tell you about, so let's talk about that for a second, and then we'll come back. We may see this ticket again in the future for sure, but I think this is an interesting one now. It is on rate for 20 shards, but can be used for any non-limited or collaborative unit. So this is a really good pick, and actually let me show you this selection because I'm not sure it was exactly what I thought it was at first. And also let me kind of theory craft about what these tickets are for. Now, they're perfectly suited for giving you one reincarnation of any unit that you can pull for here. Oh, well, that's a different ticket, but let's see what this gives me. Come on, Dark Fina. Okay, dark unit, but not Dark Fina. Close. So let's see what my select ticket. Okay, so Warriors of the Crystal aren't in here. But as you can see, there's a lot of recent and powerful UR units that you could pick up. Although at this point, unless this ticket updates into the future, which is entirely possible, there's always been speculation about whether tickets do this, which tickets do this, whatever. Don't count on it. But this is a pretty decent selection, including 2, well, Amnilus isn't a native 140 unit, but let's face it, her design is. She got rolled out a little bit early on JP, but she is designed as a 140 first unit, and I think that these units are going to be kind of a new power level. So part of what I say doesn't apply to them. They're the best case scenario. These are really great tickets for these shards. Because again, they're on rate for those 40 shard packs that you can buy when they're out, and those are a good deal if you're building a unit when it's out, so why wouldn't half of that be a good deal later on? Obviously, for new players, they're trying to build out extra characters to fit in with their teams. This is a really great resource. I would buy a lot of them if you're building a character that can be bought with these tickets, and you don't have enough limited units, most likely, unless you really went hard maybe on Full Metal Alchemist to have a full limited unit team that makes sense together. But you probably don't. So you're probably building one of these characters. So I would stick to the 100 cost units because it can be harder to find things to summon for them. Although I probably wouldn't go further back than Jaden. Really, Jaden and up would be the 10 characters that I would summon off of this ticket, unless there's somebody really specific that you're trying to build. Otherwise, I don't know, King Mont is worthy. And really, there's a number of 90 cost units in here that I would say are good too. But I would try to focus on the top 10, really. Not, just because it's harder to get their shards in some other ways. Alright, so with all that being said, another thing I think is kind of important for characters to understand is how I think of this game through generations, because largely characters came out and were roughly power scaled to the generation they came out in, which are roughly correlated with the 3 parts of the story that we've seen so far. So roughly each generation gets its own new power level, new highest level. Units for that generation will typically come out with that power as the peak of their power when they come out. There are some exceptions to that, but largely when we're talking about generations in wotv, let me just kind of give you the overview. So we are in generation 1. With the first characters that were released in the game. The actual point that I'm getting at here is that, you're noticing, if you've never really looked at this before, that there are some relatively valuable or powerful characters that are already hopping up. One of my personal favorites, also coming back in a big way, Really like her design. Also pretty important for light right now, I think. Good wind unit, one of my favorite earth units. Like, there's good stuff in here, but it's a little bit fewer and farther between. Now, where would I draw the line for Generation 2? Well, I draw it with roughly the first anniversary stuff. That would be this era. Is she an 80 cost unit? I don't know. She's an 80 cost unit. So the line here is a little bit fuzzy for Generation 1, if you ask me, because if you do Gen 1 into or the line for Gen 2, I guess, is a little bit fuzzy. You could... There is a... Is he a 90 cost? Nope, 80 cost. What about 2B? Also 80 cost. So I guess there is potentially a case to be made for Yuna, for actually both of these collaborations, like marking the end of the first generation. Because we get two things with the beginning. Yeah, because y'all are both 80 cost units. Y'all are the last normal pool 80 cost units. So yes, I would actually consider those to be like the tail end, now that I'm thinking about it. I would start it here with King Mont, which was roughly what I was thinking of. Because after King Mont, I mean, this is a whole new power level for 100 cost units. Historically, the two most popular and most used 100 cost units have been these two, I think, throughout the game. I don't know what the history was before that. Maybe, I know Ruinstern was used a lot on the Dark Brothers team, which was powerful for a very long time and was always, and still is, really PvE viable in a lot of situations, but definitely PvP playable and dominant. Like, as I was getting into the game, King Mont maybe being one of the things that kind of balanced that party out until Black Witch Helena brought it back in and brought a little bit of gender variety to the team. But you're also starting to see at this point, you're seeing normal pool 90 cost units, and you're also starting to see limited, well, I mean, she was originally limited, I think. She might be limited for JP. We may just have a different arrangement than they do for how our Sweetheart units work. But, you know, we start seeing that, and then we start seeing 100 cost limited units. So I really think that, like, because these are 80 cost units at best, it actually probably feels best to leave them in first generation and start the second generation here. So we start to see 90 cost units, we start to see selection quest units, we even get some free units that are no longer free, like you had to be playing at the time but don't have LBs, which was kind of a failed concept. We start seeing a lot more dominance of 100 cost units, and we start getting to the point where every element is starting to have multiple 100 cost units. We haven't started to see 100 cost collaboration units, but we are seeing 90 cost collaboration units that are probably as powerful as a lot of other 100 cost units in the game. But, you know, as I say, increasingly getting powerful 90 cost units, which are really starting to pull the rug out from under their 80 cost brethren, but also teams are more and more dominated by 100 cost units, and even normal pool 100 cost units, which have gotten pretty good at this point. And they continue to be. So that brings us all the way up to, I guess, Resnick the Hoppy. Okay, that's where we're drawing the line. That's interesting. So I would start with Perrine for third generation. Maybe I don't know. I could also maybe start with Sylvie, Because I feel like especially these 4 units are pretty powerful. Like, she's still going to be quite premium, and she's the first 100 cost holiday unit, so she actually does define a new place. And like, it's kind of hard to work Sylvie into this because she came out, oh shit, but Helena came out well before. I would be curious to see how this works out on, because, you know, JP doesn't have this unit, so it would be hard to kind of define her into it. She would have to be like a unit away from. So when did we get Summer Jaden? Because this would have been the point roughly where, no, it doesn't line up like that. So the dresses did happen in season 2. Yeah, that was a very season 2 thing, and there was a season 2 story about it. Okay, yeah. So she's definitely a season 2 character. She's definitely a season 2 character. She's definitely in here because of her season 2. She is. Summer Jaden didn't get a story, but Summer Helena did, and we did get that on time. So we got her at the same point. Yeah. We got her roughly at the same point that they would have, I believe. So this might be a place to draw a line, because it was a milestone. Again, like, well, no, they hadn't had 100 cost limited. Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, because they don't have all of the global exclusive stuff, and their global exclusive stuff, when they do get it, is normal pull, which is pretty cool for them, but they also get it late, and it tends to be a lot less shiny by the time it gets to them, so that's... those units never feel great for JP, I think. I mean, like, you know, good units like Alan are still going to be very useful, even if they're late, but they don't really have the luster that they did for us. So maybe this is a way to define the changing norms, because Summer Helena is really... She was the first of her kind. Like, sure, we got Summer Jaden about 4 months before that, so technically for us it's not the same difference as it was for them, but like, these are still very much season 2 story characters that were pivotal there. And she's a side story character. She's not even necessarily... I mean, she is a limited character, and she is a seasonal character, but she's not... She was released alongside a side story, which is unusual for characters like that. So maybe I want to start it here? Because you could also very much make the case that Winter Ravis was meant to come out as a 140 unit, in kind of the same way that Perrine and Rugia, whatever, were. But I think the thing that made me want to do this the most is Slime and Sorrow. Slime, because we haven't had a new normal unit since the game started. So he's redefining a power level that was previously defined by a single unit, you know what I mean? Like, this is a fundamental change to the way that especially limited content works, because now there's twice as many options for a single slot, you know what I mean? But also because Sorrow really sets up what Fire will be doing into the future really well, but not just in favor of Yuffie. I find that he also works really incredibly as a partner for Mustang. So he feels really important and kind of crucial to what Fire's doing, and there is a bit of a fiery rebirth of the element from its perpetual ashes, like the Phoenix that never was to begin with. This is its moment, and I think that throwing him in a different generation from it doesn't make sense. I think that Summer Helena and Sorrow, and especially Slime, really are really important for the dynamics of the third generation, but I think the definitive place to start this would be with Perrine. Especially because at least 2 of these units didn't get updated. These were global only, so I don't know. I guess when we see them get upgrades, that will be... I don't know, because like that's why I'm happy putting these 3 in. Again, she was designed to be a 140 unit. And I think that these 2 were as well, but they got them as 120s on JP as well. But that was just kind of an interesting thing because they got their 140s quickly after. So I would say that like starting it with the second series Warriors of the Crystal makes a lot of sense. Starting with Amnelis in the normal pool makes a lot of sense, but I can definitely see arguments for starting with Summer Helena as well. Why is this important? Well, right now, there's only enough, I mean, even with a really generous definition, there's only enough third generation units to make maybe like 3 teams. You could do King Bradley, Resnick the Hoppy, Rugia. You could do... Wait, is there a Wind unit? No. You do Summer Helena, Slime, and Alphonse. Oh shit, definitely Fire. Wait, Hio too. So you could do like Sorrow, Hio, Yuffie, Roy. Yeah, there's 4 options for that, which is what I mean by Fire coming back in a big way. But if you're playing any element outside of that, especially if you're playing maybe Light or Dark, which are both strong and do both have very strong one-winged units, they're also going to be flying a little bit solo in terms of third generation power. So you are going to be forced to, in building an elemental team around them, employ second and even first generation units to fill out your team. So obviously these are third generation is going to be the most powerful. They were built natively for the 140 power scaling, as opposed to units that have been adapted to that, potentially successfully, potentially unsuccessfully, from the second generation, going with Charisse, Sylvie, etc. down. And I think like the later half of this generation is especially powerful. It's hard to really call a point in which the units became great again. Yeah, because there's just good stuff all through here, and a lot of the stuff is really playable, and I think probably the most meta teams are going to be having 1 or 2 of these third generation units, and then 1 or 2 of the second generation units, and then more or less skipping first generation units entirely. That being said, there are some first generation units that are worth playing, and I'm just because I'm not talking about them in this particular rant doesn't mean they're not good, but we have especially seen Skahal be a very big force to be reckoned with just because of how his upgrade works mechanically and how it works into current metas, especially with Sephiroth. Also, the fact that he has such a powerful second generation healer that has such a great elemental synergy with him makes him kind of exceptional in that not only is he a great first generation character, but his best combo is with a second generation character. That this second generation combo is still powerful enough to work well into the 140 meta, and Resnick is getting a 140 that is just going to make her more awesome soon. Really, I think she is kind of a standout, but also largely because he's a standout. Like, they are rising the ranks, their value rises together, because after he got his courage passive, his auto courage passive, his stonks went up super high, so any associated unit really rose with him, and I think that was a really, really good thing for Resnick. Not that she wasn't good before that, and she's also quite amazing with a unit like Alphonse now, or even Esther works pretty well, but I think Alphonse is really like the unit that you would want her for other than Skahal. And again, as I've said in another video, she makes a good rainbow support just because she's quite powerful and lends towards heavy offense. But the fact that she works with Skahal and the fact that Skahal works so dang good make them both really great units and kind of in defiance of this pattern. And there are definitely other units in here that are good as well. I mean, Miranda is definitely making her comeback. And I think Katone is also, I mean, okay. Once we get enough high accuracy units, Katone is going to drop back off. I don't think she has a lot of staying power, and I feel a little bit rough for investing a bit of my scrolls into her, chasing Drain Force, but that's what makes her good, so it felt right. But I don't know, all the high accuracy units are going to make her a lot harder to play, but she is good right now. But, so let's use that as a springboard to talk about spending your UR scrolls, because now that I've neatly defined our units into generations, let's talk about how you spend your scrolls on them as you're awakening them into 140. It's probably going to end up being something like 8 to 12 month cycle before every element has a 3rd generation only team. At which point, because of power scaling, that will probably be the dominant team, if not swapping in a few 2nd generation, or maybe even in some cases 1st generation units for what they bring to the team specifically. Because again, strategy over raw power is usually the way to win in these games. So you don't necessarily need the strongest, newest characters, but it helps, right? So in anticipation of that, your 3rd generation characters all make a really good investment for those very limitedest of limited UR scrolls of the blah blah blah. Or as we can just call them moving forward, Viz scrolls, because, well, there's one way to get them. I mean, there's not just one way to get them, but that is one of the ways that you can get them. And if you're feeling kind of desperate, you're probably spending some Viz on them. Anyways, the best long-term investments for those guys are going to be on units that came out Summer Helena and later. So just kind of draw that line. Think about if you have any of these units, that's the first place you want to spend your scrolls. Now, I do encourage you to bank them for new units that you may pull in the future, but that's more like start saving them at the same time that you start saving Viz and let those things rise up together, but don't necessarily slow your roll so fast on these guys. I would definitely, like, 140ing units, if you think they're going to work on your team, absolutely 140 them. That's no question. That's not a generational divide thing. The generational divide is about how you spend the limited resources that you have to accomplish this, because especially for older units and for older players, you're going to run into a lot of these older units. You have at least 120 of their mind spheres. You don't have to spend anything special to 140 them. It's, do you reincarnate them after that? And for 2nd generation characters, I think that, at least for now, that's a soft yes. There's a lot of characters in here that would be really good if they were reincarnated quite a bit. I think that Glaciella is going to be really powerful as she gets reincarnations. Snow is going to be really powerful as he gets reincarnations. Mashari is going to be really powerful as she gets reincarnations. Dark Fina, who's available now as a 140, is going to be really powerful through reincarnations. Eliza in situations could be really powerful and you know, really dominant with a certain amount of reincarnation. Sodali is just such a curveball. He's definitely gonna do well with reincarnation. Resnick, Astrius, Velis. Okay, maybe Velis a little bit less because he's a support, and actually maybe Resnick a bit less because she's a support, but there's a lot of characters in here that would benefit from your reincarnations. And why am I factoring supports out of this? Or not that I'm factoring them out of this necessarily, but while the scrolls are so limited, I am moving them to the back of the line because they're not supposed to interact with the enemy. That's not really their place in the fight. If they are doing what they should be doing, hopefully they aren't doing that. So if I have to focus on who needs the extra HP or who needs the extra offensive power, I want my DPS to be able to cleave people in too, and I want my tanks to be able to survive such an attack from the enemy and not be cleft into. Maybe like cut halfway in half, but you know, 'tis a flesh wound. Anyways, that's why I'm focusing more on those units and on units that are powerful and effective. You know, the units that I was shouting out in other videos are good to reincarnate at least a couple of times, but not nearly as much as I would focus on whatever third generation like mascot you've pulled so far. Like for dark players, your mascot's going to be Sephiroth. You pulled Sephiroth. I'm just assuming that you got Sephiroth. For water players, it's going to be Perrine. If you pulled Perrine, or for strike players for that matter, if you pulled Perrine, she's your mascot. You're going to be investing pretty heavily into her. If you're in light, you're going to be investing really heavily in Wing of Destiny Stirred. If you're in earth, you're going to invest pretty heavily into Bradley. If you're in fire, you're going to cry because Sorrow isn't getting a 140 anytime soon, but he is kind of the backbone or the glue that's making fire work right now. And then I mean, that's going to be increasingly less so, and that's kind of the other thing that makes me not want to include Dragon Quest in the third generation, because they are going to age like milk. I mean, like, Sorrow is going to stick around forever, and I think Slime has some staying power too, although maybe a modernized Zazan pushes him out, but they just don't do the same things. Like, he gives you options to other things at 20 cost. He's also a support. I don't think he necessarily even needs a 140 to stay relevant for quite some time, but I think it might start hurting Sorrow a little bit more as time goes on and more native 140 options are available for fire. But again, I see him working really well on a Yuffie team, I see him working really well on a Roy team, I see him working really well on Slash, so those are things that a lot of fire players are going to want to do. I think he's going to work really well for people doing all of those things. But if you're a fire player, it kind of depends on which direction you're going, right? Because you have three interesting DPS options here. You actually have choices, and maybe as a fire player, having pulled multiple of these characters, perhaps, although like these three don't necessarily have a direct synergy, although I can see him getting pretty accurate with the right builds. On a team with Mustang, he can be pretty good. Honestly, these two can be pretty good too. Again, you want to build either of them for accuracy to work well with Roy. I mean, there's definitely shenanigans teams that these two can work well together on, but they aren't necessarily the best in any particular way. They're just kind of balanced high value teams. So anyways, pick a favorite, focus on them. But fire players actually are uniquely, I think, in a situation where they could potentially have multiple third generation units that they're building up at once, and in that case, like, I have a hard time saying this because I think that, you know, he's got the protagonist syndrome in terms of how good he is as a, like, even his MR unit is good. But I think King Mont is probably worth investing a bit of scrolls into, But the counter argument to that, which I wouldn't say in a questioning voice, is that you have 3 potentially better options. Now, for characters who've only pulled one of these, sure, invest in King Mont. He is really well set up to be a good fire unit and kind of a good glue tank for fire into the future. It has some potential on rainbow teams. I don't feel bad giving that advice, but still, I would say focus on him what is appropriate for a 2nd generation unit, focus on your 3rd gen unit. But if you have more than one of these, if you're trying to run Hio and Yuffie, or Yuffie and Roy, or Hio and Roy, look. Sorry, I just got roped into to doing some errands for my neighbor. On behalf of my other neighbor who is currently in rehab. I mean, actually, there's more than just rehab complications to it. But anyways, I kind of forgot what I was just saying, given that. But I think that really you want to be focusing more on kind of what is probably your flagship newer unit at this point. It's not that older units aren't worth building up, they are, but at this point in the game we have limited resources to do so, so it's probably smartest to spend those limited resources on the units that are going to have the most staying power. And I think that while there are a lot of viable contenders within 2nd generation, even within the 1st, I'm not sure how long they're going to last. I mean, maybe there's a gimmick that works its way around auto courage that becomes more prevalent, like a follow-up hit. Really easy way to deal with auto courage. It's not, I mean, because technically that allows the damage to resolve before the secondary hit lands. So as long as you can do enough damage to basically one-shot and have a follow-up hit, you can take out someone like Skahal really easily. Now, currently, there aren't a lot of units that can do this. I mean, you have like Astrius, who's really bad elemental matchup into Skahal. You have Noctis, who is already such a good elemental matchup into Skahal that you didn't necessarily need this ability. And then you have a more neutral like Halloween Lucia, who's already on a pretty strong team and definitely helps in that matchup, so super useful. But there aren't a ton of also Lightning, who is, I guess, kind of neutral elementally, but could work to do this. She is a pretty strong DPS. She might be capable of this. But my point is that maybe in a future meta where there are a lot more units doing that, then someone like Skahal, someone like Katone's probably going out herself just because of the general trend of high accuracy hit units, that she's going to get a lot tougher to play into the future. I think that since they're hanging on by a thread, since they're kind of hanging on by a gimmick, all that has to happen in the future is that gimmick has an overall balance adjustment in terms of how many things counter it, and all of a sudden that unit entirely drops off. Because remember, Skahal mainly came back in because of that ability, riding in on that ability alone. So making that more counterable is a really easy way to deal with his power in the meta, and something that I kind of see being more likely to happen. Whereas 2nd generation units, even if their one gimmick kind of gets countered, or even if a good gimmick that they have gets countered, they have a lot more to fall back on. So they are likely to stay in the meta longer, and this is most true of 3rd generation. So while there are exceptions, and while there will be exceptions worth building, I still wouldn't necessarily give them as many scrolls as I would be saving or focusing on 3rd generation units and kind of your flagship unit. Again, you want to have, I think the kind of ideal teams for right now are going to be one newer unit that you've invested pretty heavily in, a maybe 2nd generation unit that maybe you've reincarnated a couple times for a little extra power, and then maybe a 1st or 2nd generation unit that you just brought up to 140 because they fit the team and they make the strategy work. Right? So that's probably the ideal, but even then, don't focus super hard on all of your units being 140 right away, because there are going to be units that have better strategic advantages even at 120 than similar units that have a 140 for your element for your situation will. So situationally, some older units that don't have the same level cap will still be good. right? So like one of these, for instances, is that Little Leela the Bold still has quite a bit of accuracy, is also pretty stubborn, and is a good damage dealer. So she's just going to kind of work for Dark until there's more things to replace her. Like the thing that I think really knocked her off of Dark teams was Rafu coming in, because now there's 2 Dark flagship units, 2 Dark 3rd generation units, and they're both kind of some of the best in class in what they do. So all of a sudden, really, you need someone who does a thing that they don't do and does it really well, and the only great answer for that, I think, is Dark Fina. She is really what that team needs at that point for damage dealer. And, you know, there's not a spot for Little Leela anymore until she gets that 140, comes back into power scale, and maybe you switch out Dark Fina for her at some point for some matchups and stuff. But, you know, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that if the meta stays in a certain way that doesn't necessarily allow Little Leela back in, like AoE resistance just keeps going up, and that keeps making Dark Fina the right choice. I'm just saying, it gets more conditional on how they will fit into the meta in the future as you go down in generation. So there are some units, again, I've talked up Dark Fina quite a bit just because she's such a strong single target damage dealer, but again, even for her, what if there is a new single target DPS that's even more high accuracy than her, or even more durable than her, or something that makes her a little better into the future that gets released for Dark? All of a sudden you're not using Dark Fina anymore, and all of your investment into her, which could have been made into maybe your Sephiroth or your Rafu, it's kind of wasted a little bit. I mean, look, she's still going to fit back in on your team. You'll still be able to use her for all sorts of things in the future. There isn't necessarily a dead investment to be made in this game in a lot of ways, but, you know, in terms of feeling good and winning in PvP, you really want to focus those investments on particular units, and I think that this is kind of how I would think about doing that. But I've got to get ready to do some errands and pick up my neighbor, so I'll see you in the next one.